Welcome to this week's Consciously Unbiased LinkedIn Live. I'm Ashish Kaushal, CEO and founder of Consciously Unbiased. The topic today is Juneteenth, closing the wealth gap for good. Juneteenth, short for June 19th, marks the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, in 1865 to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people be freed. The troops' arrival came 2.5 years after signing the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth honors to end slavery in the United States. Today, in 2021, we still have not achieved equality. Large evidence of this can be seen with the persistent wealth gap. Right now, the net wealth of a typical Black family is around 1/10 of a white family in America. Today, we have some amazing panelists to discuss why this wealth gap persists and solutions for change. But let's first introduce our guests. Welcome, everybody. Haiti, I'd love for you to start with talking about who you are, what you do, and why closing the wealth gap is personally important to you.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Ashish, for having me. I'm honored to be here with the rest of your guests. I'm Hattie Hill, President and CEO of the T.D. Jakes Foundation. I work for one of the largest brand leaders in about 80 million homes around the country and the world. And we focus on closing the gap in technology, engineering, arts, math, all through STEAM, which is the focus of the foundation. And it's recently launched as a separate 501c3. And so it's a fun thing that I do every day, which really fits perfectly with this title. I think why it's important to me personally is that I grew up extremely poor. So I grew up on a farm in Arkansas. That my mother was a single mom of 6 girls. So I understood even more than you could even imagine what poverty looked like, felt like, and experienced. I also happened to be from a wonderful village of people that thought the key to all of that is education and opportunities. And so leveraging that, I was able to not only push myself out of that space, but also other members of my family. So I have combined the passion and the purpose, which is this topic is so amazingly wonderful because it gives us the opportunity to put something that's been really hidden on the forefront. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Welcome. Ruby, you're next. Oh, you're on mute.
I did mute myself. My name is Ruby, and I like to tell people I am a stutterer naturally. So if you hear me stumble, it's okay. Everybody breathe. I will eventually say the word. I am the youngest of 8, and I am originally from the Bronx, from amazing Southern hard-working parents. They worked hard, but they never got themselves ahead because they was helping family, community, but not really building generational wealth, which have a huge cause and effect for the racial wealth gap to widen, right? And so, how did I get like started on this path? I was a school social worker for a very long time, and I loved my kids. I loved my parents. I loved my job. I did not love the bureaucracy, but that's a whole nother day. But what I did love was the ability to inspire and basically engage. But 2012 occurred, gave me a accident, which like stopped me from working. And why is that connected? Because I did not have a saving. nor a investments to be able to help me. And so when I could not pay my condo fees, they was trying to like take my condo. And one of my amazing students' parents came and like we had lunch, and I basically told her about the problem. She said, Ruby, where is your savings? Where what about like investments? And I'm like, I don't know nothing about that. So what she did was educate me, her and her husband, about guess what? The magic word compound interest, which like opened up a whole new world. But other than that, right? They basically taught me how to invest long term, which made me want to help our like community learn how to build generational wealth. And that's what put me on this wonderful journey to start Financial Joy School, which we are going to close the racial wealth gap with a smile, cheese, and make it like reachable by by doing three simple things: education, connection, and and application, to help my community learn how to invest and build generational wealth. And that's about it. I am the founder and the CEO, and I approve this message.
I love it. This is going to be fun. Lisa, you're next.
Do I really have to follow? That was awesome. It's such a joy to be on this panel with all four of you. My name is Lisa Wise. I am the founder and chief Flockster of Flock DC, which is a family of real estate management companies in Washington, DC. We manage about $2 billion in real estate in DC proper. And people have often asked why I got into this business and focus on housing. Growing up, I lived in 23 different homes before I went to college, and lived all over southern Idaho and western states, and being on the move and being truly in a state of housing insecurity for most of my life made me realize that I wanted my life's work to be about not only creating security for myself, but creating security for others. And most recently and relevant to this conversation in 2020, my company started a foundation called the Birdseed Foundation. And that is a program that is providing direct support through down payment grants to Black and Brown first-time home buyers in Washington, D.C. And so with that program, we designated $215,000 to support first-time home buyers. And we're proud to say that this has been, that we're now on 8 awardees, several closings behind us. And I'm truly hopeful that we can make a substantial impact in setting a precedent for and teaching others how to create foundations and giving models that support more equity, more justice, and help people emerge as wealthier and creating more hopeful and equitable futures for their families.
I love it. Welcome. And Gareth?
Great. Well, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. It is a great honor to be here this morning speaking with all of you, and a great honor to be on this panel with our very esteemed guests. So thank you very much, Ashish and team, for putting this together. I think this is a much needed conversation that's certainly we do need to have. So my name is Gareth Waldeck. You might be able to tell from my accent, but I'm not American. I grew up in post-apartheid South Africa, and so I'm very and acutely aware of the structural and systemic problems that past injustices, past policies, and past practices have on today's society. And I think that we need to come together to combat these problems. They aren't just going to disappear. They aren't going to go away. And I think that forums like this, where we are raising awareness of these problems and finding solutions, it is a great step forward. So thank you very much, Ashish, for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited to have all you guys. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So as I mentioned in the beginning, right now the wealth gap for a typical Black family is around 1/10 of that of a white family. In other words, while the median household income was about $100,000 to $200,000 of net worth, Blacks and Latinos have about $10,000 to $20,000 of net worth. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest reasons why this wealth gap exists?
Number one, racism, right? If you have had people work for free for hundreds of years, that's going to automatically create a gap, a major gap, right? Somebody is getting unpaid, somebody is not. And so we have to start there, and then build from that. So then after that, slavery ended. Then we had the Jim Crow laws, right? Which like also created racism, right? Systemic within the government and the corporations. And so like the gap kept on widening instead of closing. Now we are here with a little bit more liberty. I say that with a smile, right? A little bit more, but the problem persists because like we do not want to acknowledge the past and like also fix it, right? There has to be a macro and a micro solution. It just can't be one-sided. It has to be two. And once we begin to talk about the past, fix it, then after that we can begin to build. Reparations have to become reality to fix this problem, but also way more solutions than that. But like we can start with like reparations, right? It happened for the Jewish, for the Jewish people. They received payment for their like amazing violence and just pure atrocity, right? We have not. And so that's why the racial wealth gap continues and opportunities do not. Those are my thoughts.
Haiti, do you have anything to add to that? I think those are great points.
Sure. I think the one of the best ways to help, especially when you come into the business environment, is to really help people to understand the competitive advantage, because very often, especially in corporate America, we compare everything that we do to what I call the diversity dividend. What is the growth? How does it help impact financially to my organization? And so diversity and inclusion initiatives in a lot of the major corporations now it's a critical piece of the puzzle. But if you approach it as a nice to do versus this is a strategic opportunity in our business to do the work, to be successful, to build the company, to make us more competitive as an organization, to make us more competitive in our communities, and to make us more competitive as a nation, because we are globally competitive. So I think one of the understanding of this is closing the wealth gap is not doing someone a favor. It is creating a larger pie so that we can all participate in a successful way. And in order to do that, we literally have to go in with this diversity dividend that says, what is the profit and lost margin for us. How do we connect this to strategic growth? So, for example, one of our major restaurant clients that I had for years, I was talking to the CEO, and he asked me that question: why should I focus on this? And I said, well, who's buying your food? And he had never thought about it. So I said, okay, let's go out and just look at who's buying, who's in line to buy your food. So then I approach it from a customer perspective. So if I want to close this wealth gap, I've got to understand how that impacts my organization, and then share it in a way that the people that are around me, especially if I'm a CEO, how that they understand that I'm just not doing the community a favor when I do this, that it is a strategic growth initiative for the business.
Yes, those are great points. I think just to add to what was said there, I think that businesses, and particularly small businesses, are a great vehicle for wealth generation. And I think the historical discrepancies between funding for small businesses, for access to debt, access to growth capital, access to working capital, have really affected specific communities. And I think what needs to happen is we need to ensure that there's equal access to debt, to financing, so that small businesses, Black-owned small businesses, can grow, because small businesses can become a key cornerstone and a key pillar for the community. They provide employment and growth, and I think that we need to do everything possible to ensure that small businesses in Black communities are being supported.
I think all of you are spot on, and coming from the housing environment and real estate environment, I would offer that we can squarely blame a lack of opportunity to own and buy homes for people who are Black and brown as part of the enormous divide between the haves and have-nots along racial lines, and frankly, racism is absolutely baked into our housing market and industry. To untangle the injustice and all the wrongs that this market has done it will require a lot of intentionality, and it will require, frankly, for people to just wake up. I think there's this assumption that, people are making different choices, or they chose not to buy. I'm like, everything about the real estate industry is designed to exclude people of color from buying. We have to change the paradigm and the narrative around that. And people in the industry need to stop benefiting from that design and start redesigning the industry for more equity and more inclusion. And it has squarely contributed to advancing segregation, poor educational opportunities. It's everything about how we've managed and designed our housing industry has done nothing to create inclusion and to advance wealth for all people as it should.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think if you think about it, if you increase the demand, it's going to push prices up as well. So it's beneficial for everybody to actually see more Black-owned buyers buying in the market. So I think one of the things you guys highlighted, which I always talk about, is that diversity is not a favor. There's an ROI around it, and there's a business imperative around it. And so if we stop treating it like a favor and say it's actually a strategic advantage, I think we'll start seeing change happen a lot faster. Speaking of that, what's the difference between income inequality and wealth inequality? Anyone want to take that on?
Yes, Lisa, please go for it.
Wealth is much more about passive income and growing assets, right? So income is about having access to jobs that help you generate that wealth. And if you're excluded from an employment market, then the idea of building and acquiring assets that create more passive growth is also off the table. So unless you have access to good jobs, high quality jobs, dignified jobs, your ability to acquire those assets is much more limited.
No, absolutely.
I'll log in on that too. As you,
Okay.
I was just reviewing something last week that talked about during the pandemic, kind of what happened with income and the wealth gap. And so the top 1%, I think it is, had a 55% increase in their wealth during the pandemic in the last 18 months or so, whereas that bottom group that are really more income based lost their income, lost their because they lost their jobs. If they had savings, to Ruby's point earlier, they probably lost that. I think it was 27 million people said they are late on their rent or their mortgage, and so they have home insecurity. So if nothing else really helped us to understand the impact of the pandemic and generational wealth and the gap, you can sit back and look at that real simple. Who are the people that could do like many of us? We could sit at our computer and our income not change, whereas people that were going out to the front lines, the businesses closed. So when you think about income, if you're in the stock market, you continue to generate wealth, but that's not the norm. And especially when you look at Black and Brown communities, I'm making 1/10, and then I'm also on the front line. I have limited savings, as Ruby talked about earlier, and then I'm faced with this pandemic. And so now I have, home insecurity, financial insecurity, all of those things. So that's I think that's the things that keep me up at night right now is how do we have to start moving people forward in this work.
So what do you I mean, I definitely agree that the pandemic has probably widened the gap from the has and have nots, and also from people who have been socioeconomic disadvantaged, now they're even further disadvantaged. What are some things that we can do to reduce the wealth gap around generational wealth?
Sure. Well, the Small Business Administration had a number of programs specifically designated to provide PPP loans, working capital to Black-owned businesses. I know there were some difficulties and challenges and problems with those programs, but I think those type of programs and providing access to funding for small businesses would be a great step, and those programs need to be continued post-pandemic. They need to be expanded so that we can ensure that we are supporting these businesses.
Absolutely. Haiti, why would closing the wealth gap benefit people of all races and backgrounds?
Oh, that's simple, right? Because just like Hattie said, it's about the bottom line. When more people have, more people spend, more people grow, and our economy grows. But if it is just saturated in this like 1%, they begin to keep it for themselves. So it's not spread out. And so like the the economy cannot grow the way it really can if like wealth was more evenly spread out. And I'm not talking about socialism. I am just talking about capitalism, working for everybody. And like, if you know the word that I'm saying, go ahead and say it. Don't have me struggling and sweating. You know, faster. You see me struggling over here. If you know the word, say it so I can move on.
Okay.
And make it a much smoother transition if like way more people had wealth instead of just 1%.
Well, and I think that it's not just a matter of like wealth, it's about a matter of making sure that you can meet your basic needs. And so people should have access to quality education. People should have access to healthcare. People should have access to dignified housing. I would strongly advocate and for universal basic income. And it doesn't need to be high. It needs to be enough so that people aren't wondering how to make ends meet, so that they can actually pursue the opportunities that make sense for them and for their families and for their communities. But when you're constantly struggling just to make basic needs, that is going to keep you from being able to contribute to your family and your community the way that you want to, and the way that we need people to.
And your health, right? My sister, who I love dearly, she works so much and cannot make it work. She gets sick. She can't take off because like she needs the money. She has so many jobs. And I was just speaking to my like partner, and I'm like, she just needs to rest. If she could rest, if she could walk daily, like I walk daily, right? I just ride my bike. She said, Ruby, you're coming from privilege, right? You have the time because you know why? We have the resources.
Yeah.
Y'all knew the word that I was trying to say. Y'all knew the word, and y'all was just trying to me out here by myself. You have the resources, and so then sometimes we don't even think about that. Just like you said, it's not just about wealth, Lisa. It's also about education, opportunities, and what is it, health, and also sick days. She does not have that privilege to even have.
So you brought up education, and I actually like what you have to say about this because I would love to have you describe the audience. You say this term called, or this phrase called, education kills fear. So can you explain that?
Yes, and so with like investing, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people fear it because like they don't know it. But once we begin to educate them, it begins to decrease the fear, increase the confidence. And that's why education kills fear each and every time. Not just with investments, but also with like education, right? People basically fear that too, right? And so like whatever you are not comfortable with, because like you don't have a knowledge base, it's a fear. And so that's why education kills it.
Absolutely. Lisa, at the end of 2020, the home ownership for Black families stood about 44% compared to 75% for white families, according to the Census Bureau. What's the root cause of this inequity, and what steps need to be taken to change this?
I mean, like I said earlier, I think it's just been baked into how real estate has been framed from the beginning. From exclusionary zoning practices to zoning laws broadly have intentionally excluded people of color. Predatory lending practices, when Black and brown people were encouraged to buy, it was based on predatory lending practices, which then sort of paved the way for a foreclosure industry. You look at just access to housing broadly. When you tie housing to education and tax rates, then you're creating even more complexity in the real estate market. We have done everything we can to exclude Black and brown people from home ownership. And so this is a legacy problem that was designed. And so to undo that will once again require deep intentionality, a change in policy. It will require public-private partnership. It will require citizens to advocate for new ways of thinking about housing, thinking about density, thinking about affordability. It has to be a three-dimensional approach to solving a problem that serves no one well. And it is one thing to say that certainly people who are Black and brown being excluded from home buying pathways that have been carved out almost exclusively for people who are white. White people don't benefit from these policies virtually either. Being in segregated environments doesn't serve anyone well. And I don't know if anybody's had the chance to read Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, but she does a beautiful job of articulating what's at stake when we live in a community, in a country like ours that is so immersed in segregation. Everyone loses. And so by revising and refining and rebuilding our pathways to creating opportunity for all that's more equal and just and equitable, everybody will be better off. And just like Ruby said, when everyone has more, everyone has more. It is not at the expense of someone else. And I think that has been the perception for so long, that if I have something, that means you can't have something. And I talk to my team about this all the time. When someone gets promoted, don't be sad, be happy for them. There are as many promotions as we want. There's more for everybody. Because one person has something doesn't mean another person shouldn't. And I think that is how we need to look at housing in general.
Absolutely. I love those points. And I think it's also not just the housing side and the financial structure, but there's also on the business side, Gareth, there's a funding gap where Black business owners receive less funding and financing, and often at higher rates than white business owners. What do you think the root cause of the funding gap is? Is there a misperception on how we qualify risk?
Yes. Well, to add to Lisa's point, I think that these are real deep systemic issues. I think it's in the design of the systems that are operating right now, and there are no easy solutions. There's no quick fixes. I think we need to be honest about these problems and the wealth gap that is being increased rather than being decreased. I think that some good and positive steps that are in progress but need to be accelerated is to increase diversity within venture capital funds, within debt providers, within small business support systems.
Yeah.
Not only at entry level, but in senior positions with key decision makers as well. And secondly, I think that the investment community needs to focus on what is known as the triple bottom line. So not purely profits, but on people and on the planet as well. And by doing this, you are actually investing in more sustainable business models. And I think that produces long-term outcomes rather than just looking at short-term ROI.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
yes.
How do you have any thoughts around this as well?
I was going to say the same thing. I think the education is so critical. And if you think about poverty, and I would use myself as an example, because we grew up we grew up in survival, not saving and investing. So that education starts at a very young level. Was fortunate. I was just blessed to meet someone. I was flying from, believe it or not, Idaho, Lisa, and I just started a conversation with the gentleman sitting next to me, and he ran a financial wealth management company. And so we started talking about savings, and we had exactly the discussion that Ruby mentioned earlier, which is not having the education. And, we saved what we could, but then there was always, if you save and then there's a crisis and everything you have goes out the window. And he started teaching me then, he said, and because he was faith-based, you pay God first, you pay yourself second, then you pay your bills. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting formula, because I grew up pay the bills so you can live, right? But so education, I think, is the key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of education, I think there's also some structural issues that are out there, right, that exist today. Things like high-speed internet access, right, clean drinking water, and things like that. And so, what role does that play in inequality?
Major. Here in Baltimore City, it has been known that our children have a high level of lead within their system, which like creates educational problems, behavioral problems, and like that is not being addressed. What it is being is penalized. And so what is it? Instead of like finding solutions, intentional solutions, Lisa, I love that. Intentional solutions to basically close that problem, they're making it a bigger problem by what is it? criminalizing behavior that has been caused by guess what, the system, right? Lead 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 in pub public housing has to be fixed, right? But it also have to be dealt with the poison that's already inside the children's bodies. And so we have to work on that systemically so we
Yeah.
can help us all live a more equitable life, not just a select few. And so that's like one of the ways.
Absolutely.
And housing policy has created this environmental health hazard problem, right? By moving Black and brown bodies to areas of communities where the toxicity levels are high, where their access to education, jobs, good food, it is just everything about it is wrong. And the damages that we've created will take a long time to undo, and we need to start now.
No, absolutely. So as an individual, what can I do to sort of help move this forward?
You're doing it now, right? That's one major way. You brought these amazing people together, including me, because I am amazing, and so is everybody on this panel, right? You brought us like together to basically talk, to reason together. And like this has been informative. And like not just for us, but for everyone watching. And so that's one way. And then like the other way is your like amazing organization, consciously unbiased, helping corporations include people not out of favor, which is Heidi. I love that. Heidi. Let me say your name right first.
It's okay.
Mrs. Hill. Mrs. Hill, I love that. But anyway, it's not out of favor, it is out of the bottom line. And so I think what you are doing is great. Keep on doing more of that.
Oh, thank you. We talk about microprogressions in conscious and bias, and it's like little things that you can do to sort of make the workplace better. An example, I'll give you an example that I've always tried to do is pre-COVID, I used to cut people off, and when I talked to them, it was really highlighted during Zoom calls. And so what does that do? When you do that with somebody, you're essentially subconsciously sending a signal that their ideas aren't important to you and they're not important to you. And it's not your intent, but that's a net result of it. And so now I actively pause, listen, and answer the question you're asking rather than trying to push my ideas on you. And so that shows that you're important to me and your ideas are important to me. So when it comes to inequality in housing and inequality in America at this point, what's one microprogression you guys suggest that the users can do to sort of just make this a better environment?
So I'll go first. I would say, especially to your audience, because they have influence in their own platforms. It is, I have a phrase, each one, reach one. And so just reaching out to people and being willing to have the conversation. Trust is built on relationship over time. And very often people don't have anyone in their circle that they can reach out to even understand the conversation that you're having right now. And so I would say, engage someone in a conversation. Right after George Floyd, I sit on several boards. I had all kinds of people around me in my circle reaching out going, is this true? Do African-American males experience this? And these were, of course, 90% were white males, right? And so initially I was frustrated by it. And then I thought, no, because I have to be that one person. I may be the only person in their life where they could ask that question directly. And so each one, reach out, have the conversations at work. And then especially, I think right now, for people of color who may be a bit exhausted with all the things that have been happening, you really are in a position to educate the one person next to you. You don't have to solve all the problems of the world, but it's the one conversation. I was talking to a CEO of a major corporation, and he wanted to get on a Zoom to just talk about this issue. She said, you know, how is that possible? And if you had the conversation with your nephews, and I said, listen, I have 15 nephews and great nephews. We have always had the conversation. I said, I was in a position to say to them, whatever it takes, you come home alive. If the cop is wrong, I got you. Between relationships and resources, I'll make sure it gets fixed. But I don't need you to try to fix anything out there. I support police. I support young people, growing and developing, but you have to have the conversation. And the people in what I recognize really quickly is the people in my life didn't have those same experiences, so they had to reach out to a person who had them, and then I had to be open enough to let them ask the question. And so I think that's the one thing on both sides. Don't be afraid to ask the question. And then if you're talking to someone who's different from you, for that person, I would say don't be afraid to give the answer and to engage in a very positive way, because we're all learning every day.
I love it. That's great. Lisa,
I
you want to go next?
Yeah. I think we talk a lot about education, and I think the assumption would obviously be that education has to happen in a classroom, but actually it starts at home and within your community. And I have a 9-year-old boy, and there's not a day that goes by when we don't talk about what white male privilege is. And it's not too early for that 9-year-old little boy to understand that he has a lot of privilege just because of the way he looks, and that he needs to think about that privilege and his obligation to making sure that he creates opportunity for as many people as he can. And it's, and even in the conversations with him, he keeps waiting for the punchline, which I think is good news, as he sort of doesn't really understand why would white men not want to share? Why is there a hoarding of power among white men with privilege that doesn't click with him? And I think that's a good thing as he becomes a more critical thinker and I hope leader around saying, I'm better off when I'm sitting next to people that don't look like me instead of sitting next to people that do. And I get that chance to have the conversation with him every single day, even if it's uncomfortable, even if even if we're out of our comfort zone in terms of the topic. It's my responsibility to make sure that I'm raising somebody who's really thoughtful about being a good human being and someone that's caring about an entire community and not just people that look like him.
I love that. It's a great one. And Gareth, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, education seems to be the key word and the word of the day. And I think it's important to understand and to acknowledge that there is a very real problem. I think that's the first step to fighting the problem is to acknowledge that it actually exists and there are serious systemic problems. Less than 1% of all venture capital funding last year went to Black-owned businesses. And these are statistics. These are underlying problems that we can't keep sweeping under the rug and pretending like they don't exist. We need to acknowledge that there are very, very real causes that are still persistent and that are accelerating the growth in the wealth gap.
Yeah.
And we need to work together to fix those problems. And I think just acknowledging that they exist and educating yourself on these very important facts is the first step.
No, absolutely.
And
really,
for me,
you're next.
so I'm thinking, I'm going back and forth with it, my thought. But one of the microaggressions that I see often is research. Well, the research says this, the research says that. The problem is quantitative research. If you don't have the correct demographics, and not just a centralized one, it's just going to give you what you want, a segregated answer. And so,
Yeah.
like, to me, that's a microaggression when basically people lean into research instead of more of a quality research, because like that does matter too.
Mhm.
But like people try to use numbers to to like maximize their own view instead of like creating solutions for inclusion.
Yeah,
And so,
I love it.
and I didn't stutter. 2 points for me.
Well,
I'm
thank you guys.
winning
This
in
is
life. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you all. This is very enlightening. I hope the audience really enjoyed this conversation. I definitely did, and I think it just highlights that we have a lot to do. And I think it's all STEM starts with education and then turning intent into action. So definitely appreciate it, and we're honored to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a
And one
wonderful
last
day.
thing, right?
Yes.
That I'm going to end.
Okay.
Thank you all. And let's be more helpful than harmful. And so don't be afraid to basically get it wrong. That's better than doing nothing. But always try to be more helpful than harmful.
Thanks,
Love that.
Ruby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you all.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Peace.
Thank you. Bye.